Our favorite landing spots for the rookie running backs post NFL draft. That's the topic of conversation today on RotoViz Overtime. My name is Colm Kelly. I'm joined by Shawn Siegele. Shawn, we teased it a couple of times at the start of the last show where we talked about the wide receiver. So if people haven't had a chance to check out the wide receiver edition, I would recommend they head out and check that after this one was posted earlier this week. Of course, if you subscribe to the RotoViz Overtime podcast feed, you get all those editions once they are available. The RotoViz Rookie Guide, also available part 3 now. You can check that out if you go to rotoviz.com. There will be a link in the description as well to purchase that for $30. Get you all 3 editions so you can check back and see the journeys of some of these players over the rookie prospect season. There's also a $30 voucher in that to get you a $30 discount off a RotoViz NFL Pass. You can use that when signing up at rotoviz.com. You can also use the code RBRadio2025 at checkout to get yourself 10% off a subscription if you want to do it that way. Shawn, that's all the plugs out of the way. We've got them in nice and early. Going through the running backs, there's also obviously some of the names that have gone at the top. You know, you've Janty to the Raiders, you had Henderson to the Patriots, Hampton to the Chargers. And when we look down through it, like, you can go into those in a little bit more detail if you wish, but the one I think that got me most hyped when it happened was pick number 60, RJ Harvey to the Denver Broncos. Am I going to double count this and add in Sean Payton's previous success in New Orleans with running backs, the excitement for RJ Harvey coming in, the opportunity that's available in this Denver backfield? Should we keep double counting it, or should we just try and temper expectations here? How excited are you for the landing spot and the matchup here with your boy Bo Nix?
This is one of those situations where you do feel this big tug at the heart in terms of the excitement that you want to express for the shows, for the content, singing the praises of RJ Harvey, the rooftops, the highest mountain. Colm, you mentioned double counting. Can we just triple, quadruple, quintuple count all of RJ Harvey? I mean, by the time I'm done cycling through this and counting one thing and then counting the other and then saying, well, that helps this, which then doubles back and helps this. I mean, I'm going to have him up there above GT at the top. That doesn't seem good. At the same time,
that seems like an overreaction, but
can we talk about Harvey within the context of the Denver Broncos offense actually being so terrible for the running backs last year? Can we talk about it from the perspective of him being already 60 or 70 years old? What can we do to keep his ADP at levels that we can get up to 100% exposure?
Yeah, it is a case of you don't want to over count it, over build it up and build it up and build it up. But I do think the fit here in this offense, the downside I think is clearly, and I think this may in fact actually keep his ADP in check a little bit, is how bad the running backs have been for Denver over the last couple of years since Sean Payton has got there, because this has been the topic of conversation. We thought that Williams, would be able to do it. Javonte Williams now with the Cowboys. Jaleel McLaughlin was another player who had an opportunity. Estimate got some buzz this time last year. There may be a case that people will be like, well, it's just another guy picked in the second round and probably won't work out again. But I think this is the one that will work out. My question for you is, do you think though it can work out with him as the lead back getting 70% of the work, or is he a player that would be better off if there is a partner there with him to kind of split those carries?
Well, I mean, he gained 150 scrimmage yards a game last year and scored 25 touchdowns. So, I mean, this is
Shawn,
basically...
I thought we were trying to lower the ADP here. I was setting you up to temper expectations.
I mean, this is basically Alvin Kamara without the competition of Mark Ingram.
Yeah.
So from that perspective, it seems good. I do think that we have to understand that 2025 is no longer, 2017. And that even though running backs have been very effective recently, that you did have a bit of a running back renaissance in 2024, that a lot of that came from, what we saw from the Packers and what we saw from the Houston Texans and teams like that, who really are just ground and pounding their way to boring, aesthetically displeasing victories. And when you think through how coaches and teams can evolve and how individual players can dictate usage, I keep coming back to the Kansas City Chiefs and how they apparently were telling everybody that the receiving component of being a running back for them was more important than the rushing component. And I'm looking at this, I'm like, Kareem Hunt and Isaiah Pacheco ranked 50th and 62nd last year in points above average per attempt at the running back position. And you gave them carries. You were awful actually running the ball. You can't continue to insist that the receiving element is what matters if you're going to have all of these running back handoffs that destroy your drives or make your drives more difficult to execute. And you're not going to pass the ball to the running back either, right? Those two things simultaneously. Yes, 10, 20 years ago for Andy Reid, when he threw the ball to guys like Brian Westbrook and LaShawn McCoy on every other play, it was hugely important. With Patrick Mahomes, that has not necessarily been the case. Now, one of the reasons that we were excited about the Denver Broncos running backs last year, in addition to all of the Sean Payton stuff, was that in college, Bo Nix had also thrown a lot of passes to the running back. It didn't really translate last year. And the easy answer is just that the running backs were absolutely terrible. But you have this dynamic where the offensive line, the Broncos were interesting because their offensive line metrics, according to Sports Info Solutions, painted them as one of the best pass blocking teams in the entire NFL, which certainly helped Bo Nix because you have a guy who came in with the ability to almost completely eliminate sacks. And then you gave him a great pass blocking offensive line. So even with terrible receivers, he was able to more or less move the ball and not necessarily need to rely on the passes to the running backs. And they just weren't in the offense that much, right? So that part was interesting and weird. Certainly he made some mistakes, especially early. The first 6 games weren't overwhelming. And then he really takes off to the point where I'm actually a little surprised at how enthusiastic his ADP is going into 2025, right? Within the context of the Sean Payton offense and the current version of it and what Bo Nix does well and what their team does well from a blocking perspective, and with the addition of Pat Bryant, who is a guy that I was raving about on the Stealing Bananas streams. He's someone I've been really excited about during the draft process, but I was like, he's going to go in round 7 to a team that's incompetent, that basically just says, like, we ran out of names, and so we picked him, and then it's not going to be anything. Instead, he goes on day 2 to Sean Payton, who immediately wants to comp him to Michael Thomas. And you're thinking, okay, well, that's better than best case scenario, basically, right there. We can move into this direction with the Broncos where we assume that now they have the pieces, because I think that the Evan Ingram acquisition is also fantastic for them. Are they able to now run the offense in a way that Harvey actually does become something like Kamara? And you can say like 75% of him. If you go with 125% of him, then, I mean, again, Harvey is not just the best running back in the rookie class, but maybe should go with the 101 just overall in drafts. Or is he going to be like 25% of, like, what version of this are we going to get? If we get the whole thing, including a lot of passes to the running backs, then he's going to be a huge smash. If we get more what we got last year with Bryant also adding, with Mims taking a step and also playing at running back, right? if we get Troy Franklin taking a step, and then you do get like anything close to what the rhetoric is on Bryant coming out of Broncos headquarters, again, maybe you don't actually need all of these passes to the backs, and there is a danger of getting caught in sort of an overhype situation with RJ Harvey.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's us tempering expectation down. So pre-draft, Shawn was the RB45. Should probably, move down. RB50 now probably is a fair spot to take him. I think that he's going to go right up into that 8-9 round range. Do you think that's where he ends up?
I think he'll be higher.
Temper expectations more, Shawn, on the next podcast.
I think he'll be round 13.
Somebody who may end up going in that range was going there pre-NFL draft, and that was another one of your kind of favorite guys going in, Bhayshul Tuten. He went 104 to the Jacksonville Jaguars. We talked on the previous show, but a lot of the names moved up, a lot of green in terms of the rankings, very positive landing spots. He was somebody who you did move down slightly, lands now behind Tank Bigsby and Travis Etienne. Give me your thoughts, Shawn, on him. That being a negative for him, and we're doing it also with Buccaneers links with the coaching staff there now, and pairing it back to Bucky Irving and Rachaad White.
Yes, I think you could go with this being neutral as opposed to a fall. He did fall both in my rankings, and I do think it's a little bit tricky here. One of the reasons that it's a fall, and I think that people would justifiably say, well, he actually went in the range that was expected, and he went to a team that probably will use the running backs pretty dynamically. So if you have this as a fall, then you probably had unrealistic expectations. Part of it is the potential for that player to have been the RJ Harvey selection instead, because that was reasonable, right? And if that were the case, then not only would he have stayed put, but he would have risen. There's also the potential that he would have gone at some point to the Dallas Cowboys. And so instead of this, unbelievable rise, I mean, Jaydon Blue had to come up like 100 points, 100 spots in my rankings. Blue was somebody I was excited about as sort of a poor man's version of Brashard Smith. Well, Smith ends up falling all the way to round 7, but into a fantastic situation.
Yeah.
I mean, in Blue, though, Blue is the biggest riser of all risers basically in this entire draft. If that's Tuten, then, again, you're off to the races. So there were possibilities for him to both go, kind of the edge of the second, third round, which, again, I wasn't necessarily expecting, but that was a possibility that you have to factor into the overall when you're thinking through the rankings, and go to a better spot. I do still think this is fine, because we know that they don't really want Travis Etienne, or potentially they're like, it's not that we don't want Travis Etienne, it's we just think that these guys are too similar, not even really stylistically. They are arguably somewhat similar in what they can do in terms of handling, but just that we think that they are backup running backs or committee backs from the perspective of what we want to do. Now, I think that both of these guys are pretty clearly better than Rachaad White, although with Etienne, you continue to have to ask the question of, he had the injury coming into the NFL. He spent a lot of 2025 very dinged up. It didn't really seem like injuries that would necessarily lower your future level, but just the accumulation of that, especially as you get older. It didn't really seem like the type of injuries that David Johnson suffered were the things that would be career ruining. And yet that's definitely the way that it played out. It didn't seem like Le'Veon Bell holding out was going to necessarily like push him past the level where then once he played again, he would be more or less done. But it certainly was the way that it played out. I mean, maybe Etienne is simply done. Regardless, this pick indicates that, similar to what they did in Tampa last year with Bucky Irving, where it's like, this guy is going to be a star and he's going to be the starter, even if it's not in the first month. I mean, that's where we are with Tuten as well. I don't think that having two guys instead of just Rachaad White changes that calculus very much.
Yeah, and that's why I would say it's like a neutral or potentially a when you look at some of these landing spots, you get Giddens who lands behind Jonathan Taylor. Like, he's not winning that job. But you get like two guys here who are like, one was buzzed up a little bit last year in Bigsby, who didn't really deliver on it then. And then you had Etienne, who, as you mentioned, the injuries have continued to wear away at his upside. I think that there's a chance that he can work his way in. The problem is that rather than it, and looking back to last year, you also had Shawn Tucker having that big game, but he wasn't really a factor, overall at this point of last season when we're looking at Bucky Irving. But I think that he can go in and teams are now willing to give, I think, these guys more of an opportunity than they would have in the past with a lead back. And I think that he can work his way in. So I think it could be a pretty positive spot with, a very creative offensive scheme being added in as well is very interesting. The other player, Shawn, that you've moved up here ahead of Tuten is Cameron Skattebo. Went 105 to the Giants. We had talked about some concerns, for Tyrone Tracy a couple of probably months back, but over the last couple of months in terms of if another player landing on top of him, being an older back heading into his second year. How do you see this playing out between the two of those guys? Where does the skill set kind of overlay, and who has the advantage here in the backfield as the season progresses?
So we were trying to unload all of the Tracy shares, even though we like him. And I think that you could actually make an argument here that Skattebo offers possibility for Tracy because they drafted someone who is also an older back, not to the extent that Tracy was, but an older back and someone who there's going to be a stark difference in just pure athleticism between Tracy and Skattebo when they're out there on the practice field. That potentially works in his favor. Obviously, he's the incumbent. Obviously, he's the person with experience both in the offense and in the NFL. I want to say all those things to make sure that we are giving him enough credit. He did have very poor rushing peripherals last season, which is something you can sometimes lose track of a little bit when the person was delivering in fantasy, in part because even with how bad the offense was, he fell into a lot of high value touches. He scored some touchdowns, which was difficult in New York with them not really moving the ball. Obviously caught passes. For me, with Skattebo, basically you just have a situation where he didn't go to one of these teams where it's completely blocked. He didn't get the DJ, get in the situation. And it's really a case where unless he went to a bad offense, and I think there is the potential to look at the Giants as a bad offense. Certainly you got that big jump from Saquon Barkley when he got out of there. I think that's actually more about the Eagles in a lot of ways than it is about the Giants. I do think when you have year two of Malik Neighbors, you've got to be pretty fired up. We like Jackson Dart reasonably well. Skattebo is such a perfect back for funneling a lot of touches and funneling a lot of high value touches, even with the lack of straight line speed. That I kind of think that we're off to the races here with him, but I do want to emphasize that could be wrong. And there are scenarios where this actually does work fine for Tyrone Tracy. It's not the way that I would bet, but certainly if we get a real plunge in the price from Tracy, then I think you can start to pick up pieces again, certainly in best ball, but even adding back to your dynasty portfolio.
Yeah, I think it's all going to be about the value up and down of these guys when it comes to best ball as well, and how ADP channels over the next week or so will get a. It used to, again, I often mention this, but after we didn't, there wasn't like best ball ADP giving us these things after the NFL draft. We were kind of working it out until we got to like June or July. But ADP will settle here pretty quickly. It'll be interesting to see which way things go. Shawn, a couple of running backs that you mentioned, Jaydon Blue. I do want to get your thoughts on him because he went 149 to the Cowboys, jumped up a lot. You have him in your most recent Dynasty rookie rankings on your article on rotoviz.com at the 208. Give me a quick overview on Blue and how much the landing spot to the Cowboys has jumped him up here.
So you could move him even higher than that if you want. This is a back with just blazing speed. And He caught 42 passes last year, scored 6 receiving touchdowns, had 64 air yards. Anything basically in the positive for air yards, you're suggesting there's some downfield component when you're talking about a running back. 154 yards after contact as a receiver there. He goes over 100 scrimmage yards against Florida, Arkansas, Kentucky, Clemson. This is a guy where Texas probably wanted him to grab a hold of the running back job there for the Longhorns a little more than he did once it opened up post Bijan Robinson and once they had the injury to their superstar recruit this past season. Anytime you have a back who sort of failed to grab his collegiate starting role, you have questions about an NFL team saying, oh no, here, come in and do this for us. Now, I mean, there are going to be situations where, like Roschon Johnson, there was no question about like what his deal was. At the same time, most of the buzz around him is now gone, right? You think through these backs, and I just do want to emphasize that this is probably a bad pick by the Cowboys. It's probably a reach. There were a lot of better options still available, and yet in a lot of ways it just no longer matters because that timeline has been closed off. And the guy that they did pick is a lot of fun because you've got a receiving back, you've got the extraordinary athleticism. Maybe it's more of an issue of Texas, right? I say they probably wanted him to grab a hold of that job more than he did. He's probably like, why didn't they play me? Because the peripherals were actually pretty good. I think you've got to be excited about this. I'm going to have plenty of exposure to Blue across formats.
And the final two names I want to hit on today's show, Jarquez Hunter lands with the Rams, 117 overall. He'll battle it out with Kyren Williams and Blake Corum. And the final one we'll have to get your take on, Shawn, is Brashard Smith, who ends up falling further maybe than we thought in the draft, but 228 to the Kansas City Chiefs. We're looking at backfield competition. I think there's less competition for Smith than there is for Hunter. And Blake Corum didn't really get that many opportunities last year. The team just lent and lent and lent and lent and lent and lent and lent on Kyren Williams. So I think that if we're looking at like who has the chance to be the immediate impact, I would go with Smith. You have them ranked pretty close, and they're both ranked behind Tuten, who we talked about earlier. But again, when we're looking at the competition, if I was ranking, who has the toughest competition, the easiest competition for me would be the Smith backfield, the Tuten backfield, and then the Hunter backfield. And the Hunter one is more so based on just how much the team has gone with Kyren Williams. They at times, even though we talk about what happens with the Packers and them leaning on Jacobs, the Texans with what they've done with Mixon. I feel like at times, although he gets in the end zone as well, I feel like the Rams have done that with Williams. Maybe that's the reason that you'll say that Hunter has a better chance at breaking straight in here. But those two guys, Hunter and Smith, again, I think like if we're looking at offense you land in, I think it's pretty exciting. The downside on the Smith one would be, I can't remember if it was this show or the show previous, we talked about sometimes the Chiefs just feel like, yeah, we don't need a running back. We'll just give it to whoever. Let's sign Kareem Hunt up again.
So both of these teams are extremely exciting from a running back perspective, and yet can also be tricky. The Rams have all of this focus around their running game because Todd Gurley performed so well with Sean McVay, because at times they're willing to be very concentrated in the usage. Those are the positives. There have been plenty of gaps in this McVay tenure where the expected value to the team from the running back position was actually very low, which then counterbalances the concentration, right? So that part is interesting. And now we have a backfield that doesn't really look like it will necessarily be concentrated in the way that it was in the past. I was pretty excited about Kyren Williams last year. He more or less came through from a fantasy perspective. He has a nose for the goal line, and despite being a smaller back, he's able to get in. Beyond that, he performed poorly last year. Blake Corum is probably a guy. I kind of mentioned this Clyde Edwards-Helaire connection with him, where being on a national title team probably, ramped his draft slot and just changed the way people thought about him in a way that was more probably the team than it was him. Hunter is awesome. Led the SEC in yards per carry, averaged 100 rushing yards per game. He was over 4 yards after contact per attempt, which is very difficult, and it was against elite competition. He broke 40 tackles, which is a huge number for a smaller back, again, especially against the caliber of competition. He had the top first down rate among power conference backs. You think about the Rams and how in many of these cases they do line up and just run at the teams, and they need to be able to convert those first downs. Those are positive. His points above average per attempt was almost identical to Bijan Robinson in 2022 and Bucky Irving in 2023. We mentioned those numbers because those were elite numbers. Jarquez Hunter looks like a guy who could vault the other two players immediately, even though with both Williams and certainly if you do think that Corum is going to hit, you would have had to wait, right? So part of that is we want to be aware of when the hit happened for the young running backs for the Rams, but we also want to just be aware of the fact that not every situation is the same, and Hunter might simply be better. And Williams might have hit as a rookie if he had been healthier. So we don't want to simply pattern match to those other things and say, well, it's going to be year 2 for him. It might not be that. It could be right away. The Smith thing is weird because you could argue the Chiefs knew he was going to be there late, and so why would you take him early? You could argue it's great tactics, right? Hit the end of a tier. The same thing with Jalen Royals, where it's like, oh, perfect tactics. You got someone who's probably actually better than Emeka Egbuka. These guys are similar, but Jalen Royals does look better. It's like, why would you have drafted him earlier if you could get him later? It's like, well, you didn't know, right? If you thought that they were going to be good, you should have taken those guys at different spots of the draft to make sure you got them. But the flip side is simply be, well, we liked other players too, right? You're drafting a whole roster. So I go back and forth with it because I want to keep my enthusiasm somewhat in check. I mean, Brashard Smith is basically what Jaydon Blue would have been if Blue had actually been a good rusher as well as a good receiver. And that's for someone who was making a position change. So is there then plenty of additional room for him to grow to essentially be a much younger and even faster version of Tyrone Tracy in a good offense as opposed to Tracy being dropped in a bad offense? It's definitely there, but I don't think you can count on this version of the Chiefs. A lot of the things they've done offensively in the last several years have been disconcerting and underwhelming.
Yes, we'll see how it plays out. We'll be talking lots more about these rookies and how it all plays out over the coming weeks here on RotoViz Overtime. Make sure you are subscribed to the podcast feed. You'll get all the shows once they are available. My name is Colm Kelly. You can follow me on socials at Overtime Ireland. You can check out all of Shawn's work up on rotoviz.com. And until we are back, have a good one.